It seems to me that after years of opposing a registry, the latest tactic from this government is to be one of obstruction through endless delay. Is that fair?
In October 2024, Brookfield Asset Management brokered a $256 million loan with the Chinese State Bank while the current Prime Minister was the chair of that company. And in light of what we know about China cultivating business ties with senior policymakers and business leaders, would you classify this as a classic example of elite capture?
We know that WeChat, for example, is a very popular Chinese PRC-linked social media platform that was promoting Prime Minister Carney and the Liberal team during the last election. I just wonder, specifically with respect to this, what connections you draw between something my colleague Mr. Calkins mentioned about the $276 million loan Mr. Carney secured prior to his winning the Liberal leadership?
Consistent with this, the director of CSIS stated just 2 weeks ago that the PRC is a major threat to Canada's security because of its foreign interference activities. And yet we have Mark Carney's Foreign Affairs Minister talking about a strategic partnership with the PRC, including on matters of security. So how can we square, on the one hand, Mark Carney saying that the PRC is Canada's biggest security threat, backed up by CSIS, all the while his government is pursuing a strategic partnership with a hostile foreign state that is a threat to Canada's security?
Prefer the blue pill to the red pill, if we're thinking in terms of the matrix. So
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Welcome to meeting number 15 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 3, the committee is meeting on its study of foreign election interference.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. Burton regarding the endless delay around the implementation of the Foreign Influence Registry. As you noted, Mr. Burton, the Liberals promised that the Foreign Influence Registry would be up and running 1 year after Bill C-70 received royal assent. 1 year was June of this year. June came and went. It wasn't up and running. The minister said then it would be up and running by September. September came and went. He then said December. And yet here we are almost in December, and no commissioner has been appointed. We have no registry, and I would note that under the legislation, the leaders of recognized parties in the House and the Senate must be consulted on the commissioner, and the appointment of the commissioner must be ratified in the House of Commons and the Senate. So there are a number of processes that haven't happened either. So given that, it would seem to me that we have no idea when the registry is going to be up and running. Is that fair?
Yes. The minister has said it would be coming by the end of this year in his most recent statement to parliamentary committee. The public safety people have been briefing us that it would be coming next spring. There's a suggestion that there are long delays in appointing the commissioner, the need for top secret security clearance and so on. But, when the government needed a fentanyl czar, they seem to be able to do an order in council and get that person in place pretty quick. So I'm puzzled as to why it takes so long to come up with a commissioner. I do see the commissioner as being key. If we can get a strong commissioner who can make these interpretations of the legislation, things like Senator Wu's concern about in association with, to get that clear what it means. What about people who are anticipating future benefits in the Chinese regime if they go along with a Chinese agenda when they're in a position of public trust in the civil service or parliament? What about secondary influence? In other words, a Canadian company that has extensive dealings with Chinese communist business networks that then sponsors a research institution. There are just a lot of questions there, and they really need a commissioner, in my view, a strong commissioner on site, fully qualified, to be able to sort them out. out. But what seems to be happening now is that public safety is trying to come up with regulations and interpretations which I believe will inhibit the potential independence of the commissioner in making this registry effective and actually getting names of people on the registry. That being said, from my talking to John Garneau, who was an advisor to the Australian Prime Minister when they put together their act, the simple existence of a registry seems to have a dampening effect on politicians who might be induced to get themselves in situations where they become beholden to China or another foreign power. So, we need to get this thing existing. And certainly the fact that we had an election after we'd heard that from parliamentary, from a security committee, that there were a significant number of MPs and a slightly larger number of staffers who appeared to be under the influence of a foreign power, it's outrageous to me that the election happened when we didn't have any means to go into this in a fair way to ensure that Canadians are aware of people who may have not been entirely uninfluenced or unable to take the temptation of benefits from a foreign power or subject to a very sophisticated engagement by Chinese entities.
Well, thank you for that. It was first June, then it was September, then it was December. Now you're saying, according to public safety officials, it's spring, but who knows if it will be spring. The Liberals have a long track record of opposing the setting up a foreign influence registry. They campaigned against it. They amplified Beijing's disinformation against Kenny Chiu after he brought forward a private member's bill to establish such a registry. So it seems to me that after years of opposing a registry, the latest tactic from this government is to be one of obstruction through endless delay. Is that fair?
I mean, I think that there is concern probably at the center of government about prominent Canadians, possibly former senior officials who might have to register because of ongoing relationships with the Chinese state. And I have a notion of people that I think might fall into that category. But so long as we don't have a registry, we can't say for sure. It's suspicion, but we really need a registry that makes it clear. And let's bear in mind, I mean, nothing stops you from, say, that large number of people, prominent Canadians, that suggested we should release Meng Wanzhou forthwith from putting a statement in the newspaper to that effect. But, when we found out that Jean Charest was the recipient of a retainer from the Huawei company at the time that he was involved in this activity, that's information that I would have liked to have known at the time.
You talked about that balance, about protecting rights, avoiding stigmatization, at the same time making sure that Canadians are protected. Can you expand on a way that you said we need to be very clear on who has to register, when they register, how to register, examples? Can you is someone else doing this that we can look at a model, or do you have ideas in that sense?
Yeah, so I mean, the models that everyone will go to is the United States. They've been doing it since the 30s, in Australia and the UK. I would say when it comes down to it, being crisp about the fact that we're not talking about communities, we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about people that are in association with a foreign principal to undertake activities in Canada. So it is country neutral. Does not matter which country we're talking about. And so, that's the thing we just need to make clear. And I was saying on my point about the online portal and registration, we have to make it practical. We have to make it doable and easy for people to do, because what we want to be able to do, it's like Al Capone, right? They didn't catch Al Capone for murder. They got him on tax evasion. So the point here is figuring out who's doing this stuff, and then you can nick them for not registering, right? But make the process easy so that there's no possible defense. No, Your Honor, I couldn't have possibly registered because the website didn't work or whatever. Just make it super easy so that you can find out who's not registering, and then hit them with an administrative monetary penalty as quick as you possibly can, notice of non-compliance, and then if they mess around, criminal sanction.
appreciate that. And then one of the other things you mentioned was that this needs to be reviewed periodically. As we're hearing from all of our witnesses, this is a fast-changing ecosystem. So how is it possible? Is it through regulations? Is it through order in council? How do we adapt and change? What are some of the suggestions you say in a system that's moving so quickly?
Yeah, two things, or three things, actually. Number one, having a thoughtful commissioner is a great way to do it. Like the Privacy Commissioner is a good example. When the Privacy Commissioner of Canada introduces an interpretive bulletin under PIPEDA, people pay attention, and they're good. So having a thoughtful commissioner who can interpret some of the gray areas in a crisp way. Second is, regulation and making sure that you've got the requisite regulatory authorities, but then also don't be scared to revisit the law. Like, we tend to treat laws like they're tombstones. They're never going to ever change. And the point is that the world is changing at a good clip here. So, don't be scared to revisit it if you need to, because I would say out of all of the laws that are currently or recently on the books, this is the one that every single party has an interest in. This is about democratic integrity, and so this is about the future of the country and the state of Canada.
Thank you.
In October 2024, Brookfield Asset Management brokered a $256 million loan with the Chinese state bank while the current Prime Minister was the chair of that company. And in light of what we know about China cultivating business ties with senior policymakers and business leaders, would you classify this as a classic example of elite capture?
I am concerned about this. Similar to when we appointed Dominic Barton as the ambassador to China. That what if the prime ministership is a transitional job for Mr. Carney and that he'll return to business afterwards? The Chinese will naturally take into account what sort of policies he engaged in with regard to China while he was in that position. So I'm not suggesting that Mr. Carney is consciously preparing for this, but the effect is the same. And so one is concerned about matters like this, his previous connections with the Chinese regime, and I mean, in his current policies, which emphasize promoting Canadian prosperity through seeking to expand Canadian exports into the Chinese market, is meaning that we aren't implementing the registry, we aren't dealing with Chinese espionage in Canada, we're not taking effective measures against agents of the Chinese regime who are involved in intimidation and harassment activities in our country and so on. So the Chinese note that. And I think, if you look at the impact of our not implementing the registry, from the Chinese government's point of view, I think they welcome it as similar to the Uyghur resolution where the Prime Minister and the entire cabinet didn't vote in favor of it, that we don't really mean it, that we're not actually going to do it, that they'll continue to engage in their influence activities in Canada unhindered. The other country we have to look at is the United States, who have increasing doubts about the integrity of Canada as a country which is not infiltrated by China or other states. So, it runs into problems with whether we're going to continue in our role with the Five Eyes and the extent to which the United States feels they can share information with us and it won't end up being leaked to the PRC. So there are a lot of implications in what you're saying here. It's a very complicated question.
Oh, I understand. It's a very complicated position that Canada finds itself in right now. You intimated in your testimony, Mr. Burton, that the eagerness by which the Minister in Public Safety Canada and the government has gone about passing Bill C-70, and then subsequently that eagerness seems to be dissipating as time has gone by. We have no appointed commissioner. You have intimated that there seems to be some softening in the implementation and the approach that the government is going to take if they ever do eventually get around to implementing or appointing a commissioner. Do you think that is because of pressure from Beijing? I mean, the Taiwanese have warned us very much that this is exactly the way the PRC does its business. Do you think that this registry is being compromised as part of a larger influence campaign from China?
whether it's active or passive is another question, but the recent statements by the leader of the Taiwan delegation here in Canada and Michael Kovrick's recent statements and others, I agree with them that we do have a problem here of evidently responding to Chinese agendas in Canada, and this is an ongoing process. In other words, the infiltration gets deeper and deeper as time goes on, and China is becoming more and more aggressive, and we're seeing concerns about Chinese infiltration into Canadian infrastructure. Lead story in the National Post today about the possibility of Chinese sabotage of our water supply by working with the filtration stations. But it's not just the water; it's the EVs. There are just all sorts of areas that suggest that a future conflict with China will not be about buildings blowing up in faraway countries, but it'll be about the APMs won't work anymore. The electricity will turn off, and that real Canadian citizens will suffer real consequences from China's cyber infiltration into our system, which appears to be an ongoing matter.
Thank you for those answers, Mr. Burton.
You had an article entitled Deep Fake Video of Canadian Prime Minister Reaches Millions on TikTok and X. And you noted that both during and after the 2025 election campaign, a video circulated on social media of Prime Minister Carney announcing, quote, controversial auto regulations. Can you explain the relevance of that video, specifically where it came from, what happened after it was published, and how extensively it was amplified?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. We do not know the exact origin of that video, as I've alluded in some of my earlier comments. Its most likely origin is it's financial fraud focused. But what we do know is that video spread rapidly, and that was really one of numerous examples, primarily featuring Prime Minister Carney, but also other Canadian political figures, in which they were essentially, there were AI voices and AI scripts that were being used to try to sell particular products and direct people to click on links to then go down rabbit holes for further fraud. What struck us most, though, is just how widespread the sharing patterns around this content was, as well as the slowness on the part of platforms to limit the spread. Either they should have limited it because it was a clear scam, but it also was politically oriented. But this was not a factor in their content moderation decisions.
And I mean, the phrase that comes to mind is trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once information is out, it's really difficult to contain. But it sounds like if we can talk to the source, then that to me would make more sense. So the social media platforms themselves, I believe it was Mr. Bridgman said these are the consequences of them not being regulated. But what pressures are being put on these social media platforms to regulate, specifically during elections?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'll ask. Sorry, Mr. Brookings. Yes. So I referenced Mr. Bridgman, but I'll get back to him after. Sorry.
Of course, I would say that this is an especially difficult question because Canada has placed pressure on the platforms, and in fact, from our assessment in both 2019 and 2021, platforms were actually more keyed in because of these pressures to take sometimes proactive action or at least quick action when there's obviously something that was undermining Canadian election integrity. It's my sense that the broader political conditions in 2025 made it so that some previous commitments, voluntary commitments that these platforms had made, were no longer in force. In that environment, one has to turn to law and statutory mechanisms to try to compel that same cooperation.
I have to admit, as a new member of Parliament, all of this is quite concerning to me, particularly as a young Canadian. I find that the more I hear from experts from various different perspectives on this issue, that government as a whole has left Canada and particularly young Canadians very vulnerable to the influence, whether passive or not passive, of foreign actors who are not our friends and who have no interest in doing us any favors. So I'm very alarmed by this. I wonder, in particular from my perspective, as a member of Gen Z, one of the few members of Parliament now from the Gen Z generation, we get all of our news from social media. I mean, none of us are going to CBC.ca, or very few of us. Most don't follow the mainstream media. I would argue that's probably similar for diasporic communities. They predominantly favor other types of information sources to get their news. So I wonder, we've got this question around how active are foreign operators in those spaces, and what, if anything, is being done to govern that, to ensure that we're getting the truth and not necessarily what some foreign country wants us to believe. Maybe Mr. Shull and then Mr. Burton on that front to start with.
Yeah, sure. It's through you, Mr. Chair, great question. So you don't have to take my word for it. Justice Hogue, in the long and thoughtful study that Her Honor did, identified the information ecosystem as the primary threat to Canadian democracy, and that's because adversarial states are leaning into it. But the original sin is the business model of the platforms, right? They're commercializing and harvesting attention. They're using sophisticated behavioral targeting ads to persuade you. These are persuasion machines, and they're not functioning like they're not broken. This is the way that they were designed. This is the way that they were built. And we've got individualized ad cocktails that are being served up. It's breaking people's attention spans. It's actually making us generally stupider. And so this is the thing. And this is all set to get way, way worse. Like, the trend lines don't look good. So intervening where you can. The problem we're going to bump into is large incumbent players with lots of dough and super sophisticated lobbyists think everything is just fine. They don't care about any of the stuff that I just said. Add to that the fact that we've still got like reptilian brains where we're easy to persuade. Add to that the fact that we've got charter protections. Freedom of expression is a real thing, right? And so people are allowed to say stuff, and you also have the right to be wrong, right? And so it's that cacophony of issues. So it's not, I can't settle it in 45 seconds because it's super complicated, but I think as a starting point for this committee, if we can get this registry thing sorted, that's one thing you can tick off your list that will be helpful.
So, Mr. Burton, I'm going to add something to my question for you to answer. We know that WeChat, for example, is a very popular Chinese PRC-linked social media platform that was promoting Prime Minister Carney and the Liberal team during the last election. I just wonder, specifically with respect to this, what connections you draw between something my colleague Mr. Calkins mentioned about the $276 million loan Mr. Carney secured prior to his winning the Liberal leadership. If you think there's a connection there at all between the November deal, winning the Liberal leadership, and then this happening during the April election campaign.
I mean, I think, are you young enough to use TikTok? I mean, TikTok not only sucks up a lot of information about you, Mr. Jackson, but then gives you shapes your opinion through very cool short pieces that would be targeting you specifically based on their understanding of the kind of stuff that you would buy into. So it's an extremely sophisticated and subtle mechanism. In terms of WeChat, the language of my home is Chinese. I use WeChat every day because it's the only way I can communicate with my former colleagues and classmates from my education in China. It is clearly very sophisticated in the same sort of way. It sets out messages which are pro PRC, and it's active here in Canada. I mean, Ashbury College here in Ottawa not only has the Ashbury College WeChat site, but they have WeChat site for every single grade in the Chinese language to speak to the Chinese parents. And I would never put anything on WeChat that would be in the slightest way political, but you can see that the degree of specificity of this technology, I don't think it's from humans, I think it's algorithms, is staggering. And we should be worried about it. And I was very much involved in the Kenny Chu matter, which was similarly, anonymous Chinese sources that were very sophisticated in their manipulation of people's attitudes towards this candidate.
Yeah, so my friends think I'm a dinosaur because I don't have a TikTok account, but am I out of time?
You're out of time.
Oh,
I'm
sorry, Chair.
And it's not because you called the rest of us. It's not because you called the rest of us old in a very diplomatic way. But I do feel that though.
There's legislation, regulation, and enforcement. There's a balance of all three. Legislation, we see it's not possible to move as quickly as the manipulative digital tools that would that could affect our free elections. You briefly mentioned the Canada Elections Act and possibly going and looking at that. Can you expand on what types of legislative changes can be used in such a fast-moving ecosystem?
Yes, I'm not an expert in the Canada Elections Act. I was specifically kind of referring to influencers with regards to that and around sort of speech during elections and promotions during elections. But I do think that there's sort of a like what can be done in the immediate term, what can be done in the medium term, and what can be done in the long term. And in the immediate term, this is a challenging environment. Platforms are currently under pressure in the United States to adhere to a free speech first approach, which they have interpreted as the platform can do whatever it wants in terms of algorithmic amplification, and that is an extension of free speech. Whatever the algorithm decides is an extension of free speech. And while I would trouble this is the interpretation of the United States and makes sort of any unilateral action by Canada very difficult. To wit, we cannot probably engage super effectively in unilateral. We should instead look to other countries, to partnerships, to joint regimes that can encourage this degree of transparency. And I would suggest our best ally in this is the European Union, the DMA, and the DSA, and their approach to mandating data transparency, which has just really entered into a greater degree of force. It is not without its issues, and they are also undergoing their geopolitical battles with relation to data access and to attempting to ensure that these platforms maximize democratic values alongside sort of social connectedness. But that is certainly the approach that Canada should take, and I think that the European Union would be willing and supportive of trying to sort of align in there. And in some ways, the Online Harms Act was getting to some of this.
Great, thank you. I'm pretty much out of time, so I just want to take the time to say thank you for this, and it's very helpful.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Burton, I'd like to get your thoughts on something that you referenced, and that is this government pursuing a strategic partnership with the PRC. During the English language leaders debate during the last federal election, Mark Carney said that the PRC is Canada's biggest security threat, and went on to say that, quote, they are one of the largest threats with respect to foreign interference. Consistent with this, the director of CSIS stated just 2 weeks ago that the PRC is a major threat to Canada's security because of its foreign interference activities, and yet we have Mark Carney's Foreign Affairs Minister talking about a strategic partnership with the PRC, including on matters of security. So how can we square, on the one hand, Mark Carney saying that the PRC is Canada's biggest security threat, backed up by CSIS, all the while his government is pursuing a strategic partnership with a hostile foreign state that is a threat to Canada's security?
It's a great question. I mean, the Strategic Partnership Agreement was signed between Canada and China in 2005. I opposed it at the time. Then when we had the Indo-Pacific policy come up, all of a sudden we forgot about strategic partnerships and talked about disruptive force in affairs. Now we have the strategic partnership back, articulated by Minister Anand and the Prime Minister, as you said. the Chinese interpretation of a strategic partnership goes along with the other stuff that the Prime Minister in his meeting with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping and indeed the Deputy Minister David Morrison in his speech to the celebration of China's National Day last September, which is that we are buying the Chinese, we're buying into the Chinese language about pragmatic and constructive, and their other language about seeking common ground while setting aside differences. So by using this language, we're essentially saying we're going to do Canada-China relations in the way that China wants to do it. And the idea of having a partnership with a country that the Commons, through a unanimous resolution, determined was engaged in genocide and facilitates third world dictatorships by providing them with Chinese surveillance technologies and all of the other things that China does, menacing Taiwan, the abrogation of the Hong Kong agreement and so on, is completely extraordinary to me. I mean, we're partners. I don't want to be partners with, I don't feel that Canada should partner up with a regime whose values are so discordant with what makes our country great.
Shifting gears a little bit, the PRC has the largest number of accredited diplomats in Canada other than the United States. The PRC's diplomatic presence is significantly larger than countries such as India, Japan, the United Kingdom, and France. In fact, in 2023, the PRC, for example, had 176 diplomats in Canada compared to 178 diplomats in the United States, which, by the way, the United States is the PRC's top trading partner and most popular immigration destination for PRC nationals, yet they had only 2 more Chinese diplomats than in Canada, notwithstanding that the United States is 10 times larger. So should it be of concern, the size of the PRC's diplomatic mission in Canada, should that be of concern? And why do you think the PRC has such a large diplomatic footprint in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Japan has 40-some, India has 30-some, they have, as you say, 176. We don't have anything like that number of diplomats in China, so why isn't it reciprocal? Diplomats are supposed to, when they're accepted by Canada, they provide what diplomatic function they will be maintaining. The question is, are Chinese diplomats so inefficient that they need such large numbers to engage in legitimate diplomatic function, or is it that about 70% of them are engaged in espionage, influence operations, harassment of Canadians of Chinese origin, and other things which are not consistent with their diplomatic function? You know, I would like to see their cohort cut down to the number that they need to actually function in a diplomatic way. And I mean, here in Ottawa, it's not just that former convent on St. Patrick Street. They have other buildings in our city to accommodate the large number of Chinese operatives, not to speak of proxies being run by Chinese diplomats in these so-called police stations, similarly engaged in activities which I believe are in violation of Canadian law, to which the perpetuator should be made accountable. But there again, we're not expelling people that I believe CSIS knows are espionage agents. The only one we expelled was Zhao Wei after it was exposed in the press that this gentleman had been involved in activities to seek to pressure the family of Michael Chong. You know, I just don't want any Chinese spies to be operating freely in our country, and the fact that we don't expel any of them, we don't make any of them persona non grata or bring their proxies to Canadian courts to be made accountable for these alleged activities, I think sends a signal to China that Canada is open territory for this kind of thing. It also sends a signal to the United States that Canada is open territory for Chinese infiltration, and can the United States trust us in important collaboration on security and military issues?
In the sense that there's a critical mass of people who like these platforms, who are interested, and who might not have that much interest in truth, who might prefer the blue pill to the red pill, if we're thinking in terms of the matrix. So is it not a little bit overly optimistic to try and address this through legislation, through regulations? Because ultimately, it's the humans who are behind it who don't want us to know the truth.
Who's first? Okay, I think the thing is that the non-truth is more fun than the real truth. I mean, this stuff about Mr. Carney and so on TikTok, it's much more interesting than presumably the rather boring guy he probably is in real life like myself. So, of course, people like it. The problem is that if we're going to get in a situation where we know the stuff is not true and we don't care, then, is that the end of civilization as we know it? I mean, it's pretty disturbing when people don't want to have factual-based information at their disposal. So I hear you on this, and that does seem to be the trend, but I think it's incumbent on the government to do something about these things like TikTok, and the idea to maybe provide a service which appeals to young people in the same way, but which isn't sending enormous amounts of data to China would be a good thing. And so far, Canada's not been prepared to do that, although if I understand correctly, parliamentarians are not allowed to have TikTok on their official devices, so that's a good thing. How can we go against young people who clearly are not interested in concerns about their personal data or the fact that the algorithm is subtly shaping their perception of the world in a way which is favorable to non-democratic, autocratic forces and supporting the agendas of billionaires and awful dictators around the world.
Monsieur Bridgman?
Moi, je suis pas pessimiste.
I'm not pessimistic in this area. At the end of the day, people, even young people, even people online, don't like to be lied to. This is what people hate. If you ask someone, even if it's a nice lie, when someone understands there was a lie, that they're the victims of the lie, they're mad. They don't like that. So we need to have confidence in that. At the end of the day, we need to have confidence in citizens. We have a democracy. These are our values. It's not necessarily the truth that will win, but public spirit will head towards the future with hope for democracy, for the well-being of our country. So we need to have that confidence. But at the same time, we need to provide the tools and the information and transparency to help people. Because even for me, for experts in this area, online, there's a lack of transparency. It's really difficult to navigate. We need to help people. And at the supermarket, there are products, and we can see the ingredients, the calories. We help people make informed decisions. But for social media, for the platforms, for information ecosystem, there's nothing like that. And to me, that's the biggest problem. But at the end of the day, we need to have confidence, and we need to provide information and transparency.